case manager and director of nursing, who spent lots of time during this coronavirus in my garden and reading many books. My fellow facilitator is John Lobitz. John?
Yeah, I'm Dr. John Lobitz. I'm a retired physician. I was a gastroenterologist, but I've had a long interest in end-of-life healthcare choices and documenting choices and wishes. And in my retirement, I've been involved with a number of advanced care planning organizations, and I joined to mute themselves. But I joined Tomorrow's Choices about 6 years ago, and I'm now the president of the board of Tomorrow's Choices and one of the presenters at our workshops along with Lynn. One other thing I wanted to mention about the questions is that we're going to have a specified period to ask questions. So we'll get through a section and then allow you to ask questions about that section. So don't raise your hand or ask questions except in those time slots. There'll be plenty of them. So that's all I have to say.
All right, Greg?
Thank you. I'm on the Tomorrow's Choices Board of Directors as well. I'm an active attorney here in Denver, and I also teach part-time at the med school. I'm very interested in the end-of-life conversation, and so there's actually a death week in the med school, and I'm one of the active faculty for that conversation. Thank you all.
Okay, and thank you, Michelle, for setting up this workshop. And I'm not sure how to pronounce Tala for being here.
This is Dave and Melinda.
Oh, okay, Dave and Melinda. Good.
I don't know if we're on the video or not.
It looks like you might have your video turned off.
Hit start video, just click on it.
There you are.
All right.
Good morning, officially.
Okay, good morning.
So Dave and Melinda are with us.
Good. Nice to meet you.
Same here.
All right, Tomorrow's Choices is a nonprofit organization. We present free workshops at community sites such as libraries and churches. And this is our first Zoom meeting, so we will appreciate your feedback as to how things go. Let's see. I guess we'll start right in. So, the mission of Tomorrow's Choices is to provide educational programs that empower individuals to make informed decisions about end-of-life care. And we do this because, believe it or not, the world's death rate is holding steady at 100%.
Go figure.
But here we are on our little island of let's not talk about it. Greg, the slide.
Coming in. Hold on. This is our opportunity. I thought
Yes.
I had it all set. There we go.
So it's not a room, so why do we have to talk about it? So the purposes of this workshop are to understand the importance of end-of-life planning, to reflect on your end-of-life wishes, to complete and distribute your advanced directives. And there are a lot of people in this world, and I certainly saw a lot of them when I was doing hospice nursing, who have not made any plans whatsoever. And this video that we're going to play will show you a family who has not made any plans.
Have no idea how tired I am wearing this. I've often wondered why, when people think of me, they imagine me in this ridiculous outfit. I mean, seriously? That kind of gives me a bad image. Like I'm something to fear. You know, there's more to me than clothes. And that's why I'm here now, in the flesh, more or less, to speak with you. I know you occasionally think about me in passing, so to speak. So don't take this the wrong way. I'm doing this for me, but I want to challenge you to actively think and talk about me. First, I'm not such a bad guy, really. I mean, sure, I'm probably not ever going to be your favorite topic of conversation. Unless you're Stephen King or Woody Allen. We chat quite a bit, actually. And I'm sure you'd prefer I don't drop by anytime soon on official business. But you need to get real. You've seen The Lion King. In the circle of life. I love that song. Eventually, I will be coming for you. And you can pretend that I'm not here. You can pretend to ignore me. But we all know there are only two certainties in this world. Taxes and me. The difference is, with taxes, by April 15th, you've rolled up your sleeves, gotten your papers in order, and taken care of business. If you haven't, chances are the consequences will be most unpleasant. However, if you don't plan for my inevitable arrival, the consequences are even more unpleasant than dealing with Uncle Sam. Let me start by introducing you to some people who are not comfortable with this topic either. Sarah has lived a long and happy life. She has 2 wonderful children, 3 grandchildren, and is expecting her first great-grandchild any day now. However, Sarah is coming to the end of her life, and as is the case for so many, she is ill-prepared.
Looks like a stroke. She's stable. Her vitals and airway are good. Oxygen, 2 liters, IV 200 cc per hour. Her rhythm looks good. Let's get an EKG and a CAT scan and call a neurologist. Oh, and let admissions know that we're going to send her upstairs.
Upstairs? Is that like you?
To intensive care.
Now, you and I need to have a chat.
I'm going to do whatever needs to be done.
It should be our care not so much to live a long life as a satisfactory one.
It's up to her to decide when life is no longer satisfactory, not me. She clearly can't communicate her wishes. I don't know of any advanced directives she may have written. I gotta get these orders going and move on to my next patient.
Hi, I'm Stephanie, her daughter. Are you her doctor?
Dr. Anderson, emergency physician. We've run some tests and we started an IV to give her some fluids.
How's she doing?
It's too early to tell, but once we get her up on the floor, another doctor will take over.
Doctor, do you think it's time to consider hospice?
Let's just get her stabilized first, okay? We'll admit her, and when she's in ICU, you can have a conversation with the doctor there. I'm sure she'll feel better tomorrow.
Oh, Mom. I know you don't want to be here in the hospital, but everything seems to be getting worse. You can't walk anymore, or dress yourself, or feed yourself, or go to the bathroom by yourself. I can't manage you at home anymore, Mom. I need help.
Greg,
Did it fall off?
it
Yeah.
stopped.
Yep. Hold on.
For you joining us, this is our first time through this, and there are going to be some glitches, and we'll get suggestions from you as to how to improve things. But this is one of the glitches.
Sorry, guys.
Here we go.
There we go.
I feel horrible saying this. I don't think I can bear this anymore. This has been so hard on all of us.
But what does your mother want?
I don't know. We never talked about it.
Mom, it's me, John. Stephanie. I'm sorry it took so long for me to get here. How's she doing?
Mom is just... I am really struggling right now. I can't do this by myself anymore. I mean, you live so far away,
No,
and
it's
all
okay. I'm here now, okay? I will speak with the doctor. I'll have a specialist brought in. Medicine has come a long way. I will make sure that everything that can be done will be done for her.
John, Mom is near the end. She's exhausted. I just want her to be free of all this suffering. It's time for her to die with dignity.
No. We can fight this. We gotta keep her with us.
I think we need to look into hospice.
Hospice? Are you saying that you want to give up?
I'm saying we need to face reality. And we need to be together on this. She can't. I can't go on like this.
Oh, I see. So what you're saying is, this is about what you want. But let me tell you something, Stephanie. This decision is not up to you or me. It's up to God.
This is a very difficult time, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, even in the best of circumstances. Sarah's health has deteriorated to a point where she is now part of a medical system designed to treat disease, not to prepare her for death.
I have a professional and legal responsibility to do everything I can for my patients. I'm not going to do anything that violates that professional standard of care. The only thing that will prevent me from treating my patients aggressively is if I receive clear legal instruction to do otherwise.
Dr. Anderson is doing what he feels is appropriate. He and the medical facility where he works have many treatments and medications at their disposal. That's what they do. But they are not in a position to help Sarah work through this final chapter of her life. Now, let's get back to Sarah. Here she is unable to communicate her wishes, putting her loved ones in a very difficult position.
Frankly, I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. If thoughts of death ever came to mind, I certainly didn't dwell on it. And talk to my children about it? Absolutely not. It was just so depressing.
When I moved out of town with my family, my mom had just retired from teaching. She was so vibrant. She was volunteering, traveling. She had a lot of great years ahead of her. And now, all of a sudden, here we are.
When Mom was doing well, it just never crossed our minds. And then as her health was getting worse, I started thinking about the inevitable, but whenever I thought about bringing the subject up with her, I just couldn't do it. It just seemed so morbid.
Okay, I get it. Talking about me is not at the top of anyone's list of lively conversation starters. So why is that? Sarah, John, and Stephanie gave some of their reasons. But what about you? Why is it that you don't want to talk about me? Now go ahead, you can be honest. I can take it.
So, what happens is that we have a culture in America that just simply does not like to talk about dying. Dr. Ian Morrison jokes, as a Scottish Canadian Californian, I've always said that I have a unique perspective on healthcare and all things to do with healthcare, including death and dying. The Scots see death as imminent. Canadians see it as inevitable. Californians see it as optional. He says Americans and the American healthcare system are uncomfortable with the inevitability of mortality. Something I checked on a couple of years ago when I was doing some of these workshops was how many euphemisms there are for dying. I found over 275 of them. Everything from bought the farm and pushing up daisies to past his sell-by date. We just have a hard time saying someone has died. And last year in the obituaries, last August, there were 59 obituaries on Sunday. And of those, 28 passed away or passed. 8 of them just mentioned services or visitations. 6 were preceded by or survived by somebody. And 12 of them just gave the name and where to get information about the services. That means that exactly 4 people died. What is it about this word? We just won't use it. It's just amazing to me. One thing I found out too is that die is only an active verb. It can't be passive. I can't be died. Somebody else can't die me. And another word that's a verb that is only active is live. I must live my own life. No one else can live it for me. So unfortunately, we don't seem to think about that when we talk about dying. We think about a good death as having lived a long, healthy, active life to about 85 or 90, and then dying suddenly, preferably in your sleep or on the golf course, as 2 of these men here would have done. I'm here to tell you that those 2 are 99% mutually exclusive. If I die suddenly, I most likely don't live that long. If I live a long life, and I am almost assured that I will not die suddenly, but will have 1 or more chronic degenerative diseases, the prolonged treatment of which will preclude either of those definitions of a good death. Death used to take place at home. It was a part of life, and people accepted that it would come to everyone, children, adults, the aged. It just happened to everybody. And in those days, it was a reality to be dealt with, and the community dealt with it together. But since World War II, we have become a death-phobic society. We've hidden death away in hospitals and nursing homes. We don't use the word. It's only in the past 60 years we've moved death from the home into institutions. And a little bit of history here that I found fascinating. It was just in 1961 in Kansas City, Kansas, that the first ICU room was set up with a primitive vacuum cleaner-like respirator and ambu bags that the doctors manually inflated and deflated. The first crash cart soon followed, made in a doctor's garage. Today, more than 11% of US hospital beds are in ICUs. In 1969 in Miami, Florida, the first heart attack victim survived after receiving CPR outside of a hospital. In 1971, the 911 system was set up nationally, driven by LBJ, who had barely survived a heart attack in 1955 and had been transported to the Bethesda Naval Hospital in a hearse doubling as an ambulance. Today, every community has trained paramedics and ambulances. We teach CPR in first aid classes to parents and school kids, and we have saved people from early deaths. But all that came with a price. In Knocking on Heaven's Door, author Katie Butler says, the attitude of many doctors and patients shifted from faith in God and acceptance of death to faith in medicine and resistance of death. There was always something, no matter how ultimately futile, that a doctor or a nurse could do. The death of the body has become something managed by doctors and clinicians to prolong life, regardless of the toll in suffering, poor quality of life, and cost. The death of the body has become something managed by doctors and clinicians in such a way that when it happens, we are victims and something has killed us. Therefore, we have, as many obituaries state, lost a long and courageous battle. In other words, we failed. It has become the norm to become a victim of death and see death as an executioner who kills us. We even have cartoons about this. So, are there any questions at this point?
No, I don't think so. It's been very interesting so far, and I'm learning a lot, and having dealt with similar issues when my mother was in a nursing home and so forth, and she had left advance directives and power of attorney and all that for my brother and I. And it was also interesting as she didn't want any treatments other than to be comfortable and so forth, but yet that we were often asked to do more treatment and put her through more, and we had to say no, which makes you really feel like a creep. But that's what her wishes were, and that helped us to say no to more treatment and hospitalization and so forth, and just to keep her comfortable and whatnot. So there are a lot of tough decisions, and I was surprised when you had mentioned in the obituaries how people even in typing those up didn't use the word death. They used all these euphemisms. So this has been great so far, and thank you for doing this. And because it looks like it's just the two of us here, and that also reflects on how people don't want to talk about it, I guess.
Yes, and it's interesting because you'd think with COVID-19 going on that more people would be interested, but maybe it probably has scared them off.
Yeah, maybe. I was reflecting on that as well, that pandemic didn't spur more people to start thinking about these issues. And I know, like you said, it is really difficult. And when I signed up for the class, I was thinking, this is something we keep saying, yeah, we need to do that. And you kick the can down the road, but it's like, no, if we take a class and have some deadlines, it will help us to start making some of these decisions.
Yeah. Sounds like you did a great job with your mother, being the advocate, and you saw how the medical profession wants to keep doing things, And they'll do them unless somebody is there saying, no, no, this isn't what they want. Your other question about COVID and why more people aren't interested, the feedback we've gotten is that there are a lot of people that want more information on it. We've learned this from the libraries, people saying, you know, will you put on a program? And so here we are.
Okay, John, you take over here.
Okay, my turn.
Yeah.
Well, Lynn has set the stage for the workshops. But before we can actually get into the nuts and bolts of the advanced directives, we need to do some self-introspection, some work on our own, because understanding our values spiritually, philosophically, personally, really is important, because you need to understand yourself before you can really write down what your wishes, end-of-life healthcare wishes might be. You need to think about what's important to you, quality of life or quantity of life. The other thing you need to think about is that not all of us die in the same way, meaning along the same pathway or trajectory, flight path, and understanding the differences that might happen, and understanding you personally and your health conditions, you might be able to sort of foresee which of these trajectories might apply to you. And this also would help you when you're thinking about your personal values. So there are four, and I'll go over these trajectories with you. The first is sudden death, and let me explain that we on the left, on the vertical axis, have level of function, and on the horizontal axis at the bottom, we have time to death. Could be minutes, hours, days, years. But in the first trajectory, sudden death, you're going along fine, you're not having any trouble, and bang, something happens. And you die suddenly or soon after. It's usually a heart attack, a stroke, or an accident. So it can happen to young people. The second trajectory is what happens with people who have a terminal illness, such as metastatic cancer. You start out at a steady state, and then you get diagnosed and start treatment. And some people recover, get full recovery, back to normal or very near normal. But people who have advanced cancers have a slow but very steady decline to death. And so if you have a strong family history of cancer, maybe you're at risk. Maybe this would be a trajectory that you would follow. So you need to think about what sort of decisions you want for you and your healthcare providers down at this last part, just before you die. Okay, the third trajectory is organ failure, congestive heart failure, COPD, emphysema, kidney failure, liver failure. So what happens in this trajectory is you're going along and something happens, you get sick, and oftentimes go to the hospital, and then they do things to get you better, and then you go along, and then something else happens, and you go along, and then, so there's a series of events. It's not just a straight line like the metastatic cancer. But be aware that every time you get better, you never get back up to where you were. And so it's a steady decline over time. So if you have heart, lung, kidney problems, you may be on this trajectory, and that may affect the decisions you make. the last, trajectory number 4, is actually the most important, because half the people in the United States die along this trajectory. So it's multiple chronic illnesses, frailty, steady decline in function, often with dementia at the end. And if you think you might be on this trajectory, you need to be making decisions what you want before your dementia develops. So it's important to understand these trajectories, because, as I said, they may affect your personal values and decisions that you make. Now, one of the things that I think will help you in working through your personal values, and you can take the slide down, is a document that's in your handout packets called Personal Declaration of Values. And I want you to take that out and go ahead and read it. This is, again, this is part of your homework. You don't need to make decisions on this now, but you need to read it and take it home and think about it. And we think that this will help you then be able to think about your personal values, which, as I said, you need to do before you start advanced directives. So go ahead and take a minute or so to look through this Declaration of Values document, and then we'll have time, brief time for questions after that. So when you have questions, go ahead and ask them. You're not pressured.
I know this is going to come as a surprise, but I actually have a book to recommend. So I just actually finished reading this book not too long ago. It's called From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find a Good Death. It's really fascinating. It actually starts in Colorado, Crestone, Colorado, and it goes throughout several different cultures throughout the world and how they address death, you know, whether they uplift or shy away from, like a lot of Americans do. But it was really fascinating to read through that and even get more comfortable with the different ways that different cultures deal with death and the body after someone has gone on to someplace else.
Yeah, I would say that on our website, and we'll give you the website at the end, called Tomorrow's Choices without the apostrophe.org. We have listed a bunch of resources and books and articles and things that we think are helpful along this line, and that would be in that category.
Yeah, I'd highly recommend adding that one to the list.
We'll do that.
Yeah, they had everything from mummification to open air funeral pyres to this one is the most environmentally friendly, which is open air. Gosh, I'm trying to remember exactly how she referred to it. It's toward the end of the book. It's basically that you put the body up on a high mountain and let the carrion birds deal with the remains. And so there is no cremation, no, concrete box in the ground, nothing, no pollutants whatsoever. But I don't know if America will ever get there.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Do you have questions about the Personal Declaration of Values, suggestions, and help?
I like how detailed it is, and the questions to reflect on to help make decisions. And I was wondering, as we look at, spend some time with this and make the decisions, do you, those of you that have worked with people as they are nearing the end of their lives and their health has deteriorated, and of course, if they have dementia, it's hard for them to communicate. But do you find that when people make a decision like that, they don't want any treatment to extend their lives, but just to be comfortable, that as they are nearing the end of their life, that they might change their mind and decide that, no, I really want to extend it, and how to anticipate, or, if I make a decision to just be comfortable but not get any treatment that would actually try to extend my life at the time, as I approach death, that I'll be comfortable with that and won't want the additional treatment, the pain of it or the cost of it, and so on.
Well, the people do make changes. And the important thing about it is to get really informed by your healthcare provider about, what this really is and what are the side effects. It's not, the next new thing isn't necessarily a cure-all or the right thing, and it may not prolong life much longer, and it may be very expensive. And so you need to weigh all of those factors. This is different when you're able to speak for yourself than advanced directives, which is somebody speaking for you when you're not able to speak for yourself. And so at that point, one wouldn't, your agent, you'll hear about this, wouldn't make decisions to change that because you've already documented what you want to happen.
Yeah.
And this might be a more appropriate question as we get to learning more about agents. But one thing that my husband and I also will need to decide is we don't have any children, and a lot of times these decisions are passed on to the children, but we'll want some guidance in how to select an agent when you don't have children, and not knowing where we'll be, if we will be in assisted living or still at home, or even what city we may be in, as life goes on.
This actually, Lynn is going to talk a lot about this.
Okay.
So all those kinds of questions.
Okay.
Okay, so there's something else that you need to do before you actually complete or start completing your advanced directives, and that is make your wishes known, talking to people about what your feelings are. There are really a couple of times in this process that you might do that. The first would be if you're really not totally sure and you want feedback from family or clergy or anybody else before you actually do the advanced directive documents. And the other time would be after you've completed your documents, you're going to distribute them and you're going to talk to people. And we call it having the conversation. You may have heard that term before. But both of these times, it's very important to talk to people and let them know your wishes, as well as having it documented in your document. So we all have, death is the elephant in the room, and the elephant has parts. There's people, it's awkward to talk about death. People avoid it. There's ignorance, silence. Oh, and the elephant has a trunk. But a lot of these barriers stem from the fact that we live in a death-phobic culture, like Lynn mentioned. We have fears we all have fears, not knowing how to start the conversation. And we're at the end, towards the end of the talk, we're going to delve into that more and give you some information that I think will be helpful for you. As was mentioned, that there are different people have different religious beliefs. There are some societies where they not only don't talk about death, but if somebody is diagnosed with cancer, the doctor won't tell them, and the family won't tell them that they're dying. So there are religious and cultural things that may get in the way. The other thing is that people don't talk about it because they're worried about being upset about upsetting the family. They think if they talk about death, it accelerates it or it brings it out. I have a friend who is a geriatrician, and he says that his patients kind of fall into, his patients and family units kind of fall into four groups. The first is nobody really wants to talk about it, but everybody is willing to talk about it. This is a very functional family. Unfortunately, there are more dysfunctional families than functional families. The second group is the parents want to talk about it. The kids are very resistant to talking about it. The third group is the kids want to talk about it, and the parents are resistant to talk about it. And the fourth group is nobody wants to talk about it. So they're barriers. One of the biggest barriers is procrastination and denial that you mentioned. I'm okay right now. I kind of don't need to do it. I'll just wait until the time comes, whatever that means, because it'll be easier then than right now. I don't really have to do it. Well, I can tell you that it doesn't get easier. It gets harder and harder. And one of the most difficult times is in a time of crisis when somebody is actively dying. I can tell you as a physician that it's hard for the patient, it's hard for the family, and it's hard for the healthcare providers if somebody is actively dying and nobody knows what to do. And the fallback position, as you mentioned, in the medical profession is, well, if nobody's going to tell us, we have to do everything. And that's not always appropriate. Mm-hmm. So when's the best time to have a conversation? Complete your advanced care documents. Best time's right now, and you're here. Hopefully you're going to carry through with this and complete your documents. So let's get personal. What keeps you from bringing up the subject? What about having the conversation? Who do you think is going to be hard to talk to? The bottom line, it's up to you personally to complete your documents and start the conversation. So we're going to show you another cartoon here.
It's funny, John, years ago, I talked my husband, who didn't like to talk about death at all, into getting our wills done, getting our living wills done, all of that stuff. But we had that all completed. We handed copies of our wills over to our chosen executors for the wills. But I can't even remember for sure. I think I tentatively tried to bring the topic up with our kids, our two boys, and it was shut down immediately. So obviously we fall into, I think, the third category that you mentioned.
Yes.
And we've never made the attempt ever again to have that conversation.
Yeah. So be aware that the advanced directives are for medical things only. They have nothing to do with your will, your estate. that kind of stuff. But you're absolutely right. You at some point need to go back to your kids and say, you know, here's COVID-19. I could get it tomorrow and I could die. And I need you to know what I want.
Well, and we actually have the perfect situation. My father-in-law, who's in memory care, has contracted COVID.
Yeah.
So we're actually, they've said that he has just a few days.
Yeah.
But it'll be a perfect opportunity to start that conversation. I did have a question for you, actually a couple of them. One is, how frequently do you recommend that people revisit their advanced directives?
Yeah.
Like I said, we did this a long time ago, like probably 10 plus years. And then there's been kind of a time in between where we updated the wills because both our boys became adults. So, you know, the wills needed to change as far as trusts and stuff. But we took a look at our living wills and all of that at the same time. But that's still probably been at least 5 years or more.
Yeah. So actually, I will get into this
Okay.
topic towards the end. So that's a good question.
Okay, sorry.
And any other questions at this point?
My other question, and I do have personal experience with this as well, is how often, this is kind of a two-part question, how often do you guys see where someone has set up, and this might actually be a question for Greg as an attorney, someone has taken the time to set up all their advanced directives, but someone in their family or close to the family disputes or basically ignores the advanced directives. And on the heel of that, part B would be, you know, who's there to represent that person, that this is what they said they wanted, and you're choosing to completely go a different direction. And that's not your legal right to do so.
What, you want to talk to that, Greg?
I certainly can. One of the things I wanted to share, and I heard, I think, in the question that Melinda asked, what if people change their mind? And that's part of this conversation about, I think Mom didn't mean this. You know, she wrote this 8 years ago, and so let's just not even talk about that. And they'll have the same conversation, by the way, with the will. I can't believe it got cut out of the will. That, you know, it seemed so unfair.
Was so bad of a kid.
Yeah. So we have such an interesting culture where we decide that you can write out what you want to have happen to your stuff, and you can write out what you want to happen to your body as you are being treated by healthcare when you can't be in charge. So one of the things I tell, and I have some personal experience with this, my former wife's brother was dying, and there were these nurses that were intent on sticking him with all these needles. And she was like, just stop. He doesn't want that. And this is way back in the 80s, and we didn't really have everything written up. She had to lay over his body to keep the healthcare provider. She said, I'm going to call security. She said, well, please do. Because there just wasn't a clear message to the healthcare providers, here and no further. Now, in the modern era, one of the other things I share with people is if you don't have your advanced directives handy, no one is going to go looking for them, right? So this idea that you get in the emergency room and then somebody rifles through your purse to try to find your advanced directives, who's going to do that? Now, you know you have the red tag on your refrigerator, and I don't know, Dave and Melinda, do you have that? With the
No.
So we give them away when we back in the day when we were in personal, we had a little sheet, and then you fill it out, and the EMTs are instructed to go to the refrigerator and see if there is one of these red tag holders, and in it you'll find directions. For instance, do not attempt resuscitation, or don't intubate. So that's one space where a piece like that could happen. If that's missing and you're in the emergency department and no one knows your wishes and none of your people are there, they're just going to go. Now, 2 days later, in comes a brother who completely disagrees with shutting off life support. The doctors are supposed to go with whatever paperwork they find. But if there's no paperwork, they typically go with whoever seems to be in charge of the family. And Lynn and John can speak to this better than I can, because they have been there and seen this dynamic work. And so whoever sort of takes on, often the healthcare providers want to defer because they don't want to go to their hospital lawyers or go to a judge. So if there's some way that the decision can be made on the ground, they don't want to necessarily mediate among family members. You saw that in the video, right? We have two very different minded family members. So your question is an exact right one. It is possible that the exact written materials will not be followed. A, they're not there. They don't have them. B, they're there, but there's somebody who's overriding them with their family will, their effort, their approach. Or C, the doctor themselves are reluctant. Maybe they don't feel there's clarity. So there are a lot of ways that this can go off the rails. Can I ask Lynn and John, you've been in these moments. What happens when the family kind of knows the right answer, but some family member disagrees?
Lynn, do you want to respond?
Well, the next section that we're going to go into is who to pick as your agent, and that really is the key thing. You've got to have somebody who will stand up, and if there are other members of the family who disagree, there are two things that have happened. First, if one of my three sons decided that he didn't want what my directives say, I haven't talked to him enough to get him to understand what it is I want. So that's a key thing, is talking to people. Your family shouldn't have any questions about what you want if you talk to them.
Yeah, they may not agree with your choices.
No,
but they need to understand what
they have to agree that you have made the choices.
Yeah.
So we will get into that in a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm actually the selected agent for one of my best friends, and she said, I was going to have my oldest daughter be the executor and my healthcare representative and everything. She said, but when I thought about things, I realized, Michelle, you wouldn't have any trouble pulling the plug on me. I think that's a compliment, but I'm not sure.
Well, I think this is a really powerful conversation, because the natural person may well feel jilted when it turns out they find out they're not it. I won't go into details, but I had a family situation like this where one family member thought that they should be, the guardian, and another family member got to be it, right? And they were jilted and they were sad. But at the end of the day, the decision was correct, because the second person really did have a better way of managing their emotions and the frustrations that came with the appointment. So you know best.
Conversely, if you do pick a family member, like Melinda has a brother, I have an older brother, they may feel uncomfortable doing that and not want to do that. So in fact, you may want to consider an attorney or someone else versus a family member.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to point out is it's very important for everybody in all states to have advanced directives. In most states, there is a hierarchy that's determined by law of who the decision makers are. It's usually spouse, adult children, on down the line. In Colorado, there's none of that. So there's nobody legally designated as to who this person might be. And it's up to the physician to try to figure out who all the players are and come to a consensus. And in a time of crisis, it just doesn't happen. And it's usually the person that shouts the loudest that gets their opinion followed. And so, especially in Colorado, you need to have an advanced directive.
I don't know if this is true for all insurance companies, but when my mom was failing, she had Kaiser insurance, and so we actually had those advanced directives filed with Kaiser and also with Rock Creek Hospital, which was kind of partnered with Kaiser. So whether and my sister and I both had the paperwork in our vehicles all the time for both our parents, just in case. But just in case we weren't there, something happened and we
Yeah.
couldn't be there, they would have the paperwork. And I don't know, I guess I better check with my own insurance company to find that out.
Most
Well, there-
insurance companies do allow you to file your advance directives in your records,
Cool.
but sometimes they might not be accessed. So it still is important to have an agent who will speak for you.
Right. So you have to
And-
make sure that you're about to die Monday through Friday between 9 and 5 o'clock.
Well, the electronic health records that people have now are getting robust, and
Yeah.
most of them, not all of them, but most of them have a placeholder for an advance directive. Now, whether people are going to look it up or not, you don't know. The other thing is that Lynn and I are on a group. It's a advanced care planning group, and we've learned that there are some laws being written that will create a statewide registry for advanced directives. Hasn't happened yet. There are a
Well,
lot of
actually,
things-
John, it was passed last year.
Okay,
That law was passed last year, and there will be a statewide directory. However, they haven't financed it yet.
Oh.
And they haven't gotten some group to be the ones that set it up and get it all working. But it's in the works.
I nominate Tomorrow's Choice.
okay. So I think at this point, I think we'll get on with really the nuts and bolts of advanced directives. And Lynn's going to talk to us about the part one. Go ahead, Lynn.
Okay. We have a little cartoon here first. Another family that won't talk about advanced directives. It's called The Report. And Greg can't find it. There it is. Now, this is obviously a family who has not talked about anything because mother's fine. It's nothing. Don't worry. But that obviously is not always the way it works. Now, the first part of your advanced directives, and you have a copy that you've downloaded, I think,
Yes.
is the medical durable power of attorney. And this is somebody that you name to make decisions for you when you can't. This person doesn't have any power until you can't talk. The qualifications that somebody has to have for being your attorney or your agent, they must be over 18 years old or 18 or older. They have to be capable of making sound medical decisions. And oftentimes a spouse or a child is not the best person because they're not capable of making sound decisions for you. Either they're too emotional or they just don't understand the circumstances enough to be able to make those good decisions. And part of that is having conversations so that they are capable. And part of it is that they just have to be the kind of person who would be able to do it for you. These decisions can be difficult and very emotional sometimes. Michelle mentioned pulling the plug, and sometimes that has to be done. So are they capable of saying, this is the end? And another qualification that's kind of interesting nowadays is, do they live nearby? Having somebody at the hospital or at the home is really important sometimes, not always, but in this day of phones and that kind of thing, you'd think that you could have a phone conversation with the doctor and find out everything that's going on. But if you're not there to advocate for the person in person, sometimes it doesn't work too well. Now, agents bear no financial or legal responsibility or liability. Nobody can sue them for trying to follow your directions. They can consent to or refuse any treatment or diagnostic test. They obviously can implement your advanced directives, and they can access your medical records so that they know exactly what it is that you're dealing with. And they can talk to the doctors about what's going on and then make decisions according to your advanced directives as to what you would have want done when you can't talk. Now, the other things they can do is they can admit or discharge you from the hospital. And one of my neighbors just recently had a really bad respiratory thing. It wasn't COVID, but she has congestive heart failure and her lungs were filling with fluid. And her agent, her son, knew that she wanted to be at home. So when she was getting better, they wanted to send her to a nursing home, and he said, no, she's going home. That's what she wants. So he was able to make sure that she wasn't sent to a nursing home. So the agent can contract for healthcare services. You can have somebody come to the house or be put in a nursing home. And then the other thing the agent can do is if you have said that you want anatomical gifts given after you have died or as you are dying, if some of them need to be kept alive till they're harvested, the agent can say that that needs to be done now. So that's the only thing they can do as you're dying or after you have died. Now, in your packet, there also is a page asking you to think about some people who might be possible agents. And I know that Dave and Melinda, you were saying that you don't have children. Think about maybe one of your brothers or a friend or someone who is close to you but not related would be somebody who you could use as an agent, like Michelle is an agent for one of her friends. Take just a minute and jot down some names of people that you think might be possibilities.
Your doctors.
And at this point, does anybody need a break or everybody okay?
Was your neck good?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're all right. Thank you.
Okay. So deciding who your agent is going to be can be a very, very important thing. I have 3 sons, and my middle son is the one who I named as primary agent, and the other 2 are alternate agents. They all know what I want, but Ed lives the closest. So he's the one that I'm going to have named number 1. If he's not in town or something, Bill lives next closest, so he's number 2. And Bob lives up in the mountains, so he's number 3.
So I'd like to add, there's a section for your primary agent and alternative agents. The way this works is if the primary agent is available, they have authority. If they're not available and the secondary agent is, they have all the authority, and their authority lasts until the primary agent then becomes available. So at any given time, there's only one person who has the legal authority. And we strongly recommend that you not have co-agents, even though you think they may be on the same page. When it comes right down to the end of it, there may be disagreement. You need to have one person in charge.
Okay.
The other thing I'd like to do is to give you a personal anecdote. I was the agent, power of attorney for both my parents. Both my parents were physicians. My mother was very active in this type of movement way back in the 1980s in the state of Oregon. And so every time a new document became available, it got executed, we got a copy. There was absolutely no question what she wanted, which was to do nothing. And my father was in total agreement with that. Both my parents, although elderly, were fully mentally intact. And my mother had a stroke. It was clear that she wasn't going to live more than maybe a few hours or a day or so. And my father, who was intelligent, a physician, knew exactly what she wanted, turned to me and he said, I don't know what to do. And I said, Dad, you don't have to do anything, because I'm the agent. I'm the person who makes the decisions. And all of a sudden, this sense of relief came over him that he could be the husband. He didn't need to be the decision maker here. And that was really affected me profoundly in understanding that not always is a spouse the right person. In my personal advanced directives, because of this experience, I didn't want my wife, even though I think she would do a good job, I didn't want to put her in that position. So I have named my stepdaughter, who I'm very close to be my agent. And my children, who don't live in Denver, she lives a couple of blocks away, so she's nearby. My children, I have two daughters that live in Oregon, and I talked to them about it and mentioned, went over the reasons that I picked my stepdaughter, and they're totally on board with that. On the other hand, I am the agent for my wife. I obviously feel comfortable dealing with these kinds of things. And although clearly it'll be emotional, I don't think that I'll have any problem being the agent. So there are those kinds of questions. And then somebody mentioned having somebody who could pull the plug. And I have a college classmate who said that he wants nothing done. And he said he chose his daughter because she's the most cold-hearted person he knows. So yeah, picking the right agent is important.
And I think the key thing to remember too is that every death doesn't require an agent. If you are able to speak for yourself until you die, then you're in charge the whole way.
Right.
And nobody else can speak for you unless you can't speak for yourself. So if I'm able to say, don't put me on a ventilator, that's my decision, and nobody else can say anything about it. If I have gotten to the point where I am not able to breathe without a ventilator and I can't talk for myself, then my agent would follow my wishes, which would be, do not put me on a ventilator. So, it's probably, I don't know what the percentage is or whether people have ever checked it out, what the percentage of people who need an agent is versus those who die under their own power. Interesting to know.
I don't know percentages, no.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know that if anybody's ever kept records.
I think that's a great question. I'll next time I'm at the med school and we're talking about studies, I'll share that concern.
Yeah.
One thing that
Yeah.
one of the statistics that we do share during Death Week is that as many as 50% of advanced directives or what people thought they were going to do shift. And often their circumstances are different. So you're not really quite trapped in it. And one of the things that you just to segue what you just said, you're not stuck with, a decision you made 6 years ago. And while you're maybe a little semi-conscious, if you say, you know what, I would like to fight like hell. I really do. I thought I would want to get off these things, but I see my daughter here and I don't want to. That's okay. You're not trapped in these choices. The same with hospice. The people, they're like, well, I'm on hospice. You can't come out. Well, of course you can come out. If you get better or if something changes, we're not going to I'm sorry, you stepped in hospice, you can't come back. So these are still flexible documents. I can say as a lawyer, and I can tell you as the healthcare providers, the goal is what really works for you in this moment. And perhaps the change of your circumstances changes the paperwork. But what they're saying is, as long as you're up and at 'em in some way of communicating, forget any of this paperwork. It's only when you're lost and gone and really can't be asked anymore that this takes on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we'll go on to this part 2 of your advanced directives. It's in the document as well. And I want you to pull it out because I don't think a lot of people understand how the living will works. The living will is very specific about people with very advanced conditions. And if you look at the first paragraph, terminal injury, illness, or disease, prolonged and or irreversible coma, persistent vegetative state, meaning the person's alive, but there's nobody there. They don't seem to be there. And most importantly, in our current society is advanced and progressive dementia. And in these conditions, with a living will, your healthcare professional certifies that you have no reasonable probability of recovery. So we're not talking about, oh yeah, I'm getting pretty sick and this might happen. These are people who are basically out of it, gone, whose life can be prolonged. And Lynn just took a break here, but when she gets back, I'll have her tell you about one case of something like this that went on for quite a while. So if you have these conditions, then you have to think about what you would want as far as treatment, and the sort of the table below. Here, Lynn's back. Lynn, I was talking about people with very advanced conditions and keeping them alive. And I know you had experience with a patient whose husband was kept alive for a long time. You want to
Yeah.
talk about that?
It was a woman who was at a church workshop that I gave, and she was unable to allow her husband to go, and he didn't have advanced directives, and he had a massive stroke, had no brain function, but she kept him alive on ventilators and IV fluids and that kind of thing for 7 years.
Oh.
Yeah.
And she thought that she was doing the right thing by him, that he would somehow come back again. And she visited him every day at the nursing home where he was, that they were giving him all of that treatment. But, obviously there was no way he was going to come back because he had no brain function whatsoever. But
yeah, so these kind of things can happen. And with your advanced directives, you can hopefully modulate that.
yeah.
Look at the table, which is just below, in the middle part of the first page. And these are options that you can think about. And your responses can be, yes, I want that. No, I don't want that. Or a trial. And a trial means usually 5, maybe 7 days of trying something to see if things will improve.
John, with what's going on in hospitals now, apparently it's a 3-day trial.
It's a 3-day trial.
Yeah.
But realize that you're not going to improve the patient's condition. They're not going to get better. They're not all of a sudden going to wake up. It may prolong the condition they're in, in my opinion, prolong their death. But some people think that having people live as long as they can, no matter what, is the right thing to do, and that's their choice. So these things that can be done, the first is CPR, and Lynn's going to talk about CPR and how that works. You can choose comfort care. I don't want any life-sustaining things. Medication to control pain. I think if any healthcare provider, if they see somebody in pain, wants to help that. But if you don't, you can choose not to have that. Do you want to go to the hospital? On down below is, if you go to the hospital, do you want to go in ICU? And down below that, if you're in an ICU, do you want to go on a ventilator? So those are all choices. There's also a question about treatment for infection. Well, people say, well, infection's going to maybe they're going to be uncomfortable, so we ought to treat that, and that'll kind of help them out. Well, realize that people, especially people with dementia, you don't die of dementia. Most of them die of infection. And it's usually a urinary tract infection or a pulmonary infection, pneumonia, because they regurgitate and aspirate. So some people would look at treating an infection or not treating an infection as a way to help the person through their end of life. It's not active care, it's passive care. And there are other things, surgery, diagnostic tests. Well, why would you want to do that if you had one of these terminal conditions? Well, some people would choose that. A pacemaker for your heart regulating things. Blood transfusions, if you're bleeding or if you're anemic. Is that going to help the patient? Well, some people would want that. Chemotherapy, I would think these people are really beyond that. Dialysis, and then hospice care, do you want that or not? So these are all things that you can think about and designate whether you may or may not want those things. We have made a separate thing for nourishment and hydration, because there are a lot of questions about this. A lot of people think that if you're not providing this for people, they suffer. Starvation is not painful. If you're conscious, the first few days might be a little bit uncomfortable, and maybe Lynn would speak to this because she's been involved with patients who were mentally intact, who chose to stop eating and drinking. And you might expand upon what that experience is like.
Okay. The most memorable patient that I had with hospice chose to stop eating and drinking when he, as an Alzheimer's patient, could no longer recognize his children. And he had told his wife and had it written out that when he got to that point, he wanted to stop eating and drinking because at that time, that was the only thing that was allowable by the law. So actually, the first day that he stopped eating and drinking, he kind of forgot and brushed his teeth and did some things that put more water into his body. And his wife had to start really monitoring what he was doing because he didn't remember. And from the second day till the 5th day, it usually doesn't take more than 5 days for somebody to die from stopping eating and drinking. And if they have something like congestive heart failure, their body actually becomes more comfortable because their body, as somebody with congestive heart failure, can't process all the fluids and it builds up in the lungs and makes you really uncomfortable. So he became more comfortable as he stopped eating and drinking. And by the 3rd day, he was basically non-responsive. And then he died on the 5th morning. But it's not painful. And when you're doing that, you can take pain medications if you have an underlying condition that is, terribly uncomfortable. So it's not a painful thing to do, and it is very easy for somebody who has dementia if somebody else is there to watch what's going on.
Thank you, Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
This nourishment and hydration also applies to whether or not you would want a feeding tube. Feeding tubes are placed surgically. You can also get a feeding tube placed down through your nose, a nasogastric tube. That when people do that, that's usually for a short period of time. And then IVs. And it just prolongs things. It doesn't cure anything.
Yeah.
But some people want that. Some people think that's necessary. So you have a choice on the bottom of the first page, to be offered spoon feeding, but if you push it away, don't force it. You can stop eating and drinking. You can accept or not accept tube feedings for hydration and nutrition. And if you turn the page over, or you can refuse to have that. So that's an important decision that you should make.
And John, I think one of the things that people kind of forget about is that in our society, we think that feeding people is loving them. And when somebody is in the process of dying and their body is shutting down, feeding them is not loving them, it's making them very uncomfortable because their body can't process the food or the fluid. So it's a very difficult thing to get people to understand that you can love them by holding their hand or doing something else rather than feeding them.
Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is show you a slide about what doctors would want if they were in these conditions. And this is there were about 100 physicians, and they were asked what they would want for themselves, not for their patients, because a lot of times they'll prescribe these things for their patients if it's wanted. The black line is no, the gray line is yes, and then there's some smaller boxes, they're not sure. So physicians, no, don't want CPR, ventilation, dialysis, chemotherapy, surgery, feeding tube, antibiotics, all these things. The only thing they want is pain control, pain medication. So these are physicians who have seen people go through this very advanced stage of disease end of life. they wouldn't want any of those things. So that just gives you another perspective on that. At this point, do you have questions that come up?
I think some of this gets due to what your religious beliefs are. I think it's,
Sure.
in our case, we're both Catholic and pretty much follow the teachings of our church. And so there's, I think it's important to consult your spiritual advisor, your priest or whatever, in a lot of these matters, especially like stopping eating or how that, what that means, in terms of what
it's interesting. I practiced in a Catholic hospital, and I dealt with patients who were near the end of life. And I know there are different beliefs within Catholicism about how to interpret this, but the point that the people at the hospital and the nuns and things made was, one of the tenets that they have is to prevent suffering. And so when somebody is in the process of dying and they're uncomfortable, it was okay with them. This isn't true of all hospitals, but it was okay with them to give patient pain medications, and as much as it took to control their pain, even if it accelerated the last few hours of their life, or decelerated, shortened. So your particular situations, I don't know, but I found that interesting. I could actually write an order. One of the first questions I would ask somebody who was in the active process of dying, if I could communicate with them, is, are you uncomfortable? Are you having pain? And if they said yes, I could write an order that said, morphine drip, titrate to comfort. The hospital was comfortable with that. The nurses were comfortable with doing that. And I think this, at least to them, honored their teachings that preventing suffering is important. Any other questions?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Lynn, who's going to talk about CPR and some other things. So Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, and we'll start off with another cartoon.
I lost it.
Can you hit the back arrow?
I think we lost you. Hello?
Hello?
We lost our screen.
Hit save file.
We can see you, but
We can't see anything on the screen. It says, when prompted, select save file.
oh, well, then why don't you read the cartoon?
Okay, the cartoon is Baldo, if you know him. He's the teenager. And his dad says, "What are you watching, Baldo?" And he says, "Some medical show. And just so you know, I never want to live in a vegetative state dependent on a machine." And his dad says, oh, and then he says, "If that ever happens, just pull the plug." And his dad said, "Okay."
Yeah.
And he
Now we
pulls
got
the,
it. Okay.
okay, and he pulls the plug to the television. I thought that was pretty funny. So CPR is kind of a strange thing in American culture. What do you think the survival rate is from CPR on TV shows?
Pretty high.
Very high.
It's completely inaccurate.
Yes, it's over 75%. A lot of people think it's more like 95%. In reality, 50% of people who are given CPR don't survive the attempt. 35% died in the ICU within a week of complications from broken ribs and punctured lungs. Because especially on older people, when they do CPR, they have to push really hard to get the lungs to start functioning. And in older people, they often break ribs, and then the ribs puncture the lungs when they're broken.
Mhm.
And in reality, 3% had a fairly good outcome and returned to a meaningful life. That's pretty different from what we see on television when people get up and go home. Of that 35% who, 5% who returned to their lives at a dramatically reduced capacity, and then 3% actually had a meaningful life afterwards. And most of them were very young people who had been in an accident or something and got CPR very quickly and were able to get better. And this graph showing another perspective, this was 100 elderly patients after 1 year after an in-hospital resuscitation. And it shows basically the same thing, that 49% didn't survive the attempt, 34% died before they were discharged from the hospital, 7 died after hospital discharge, usually in a nursing home, and 10 are still alive, and almost all have significant neurological deficits. CPR is something that we have kind of a misconception about because of the way hospital shows on television portray it. And so many people get up and walk out, which just doesn't happen. Now, if you have a DNR or a DNAR, which means do not attempt resuscitation, it must be prominently displayed. And we will get to you somehow. Michelle, I'm sure we can work this out. We'll get to you one of those little red things that you put on your refrigerator with a magnet that has your DNR instructions in it, or no CPR instructions.
Called the file of life.
Yeah.
Cool. And then Melinda, Dave, we can provide that to you, or one of them to you as well, through our curbside service, just like you would pick up books or movies at the library.
Yeah, I'll get some to you, Michelle.
Great. Thanks, Linda. Lynn.
It's okay. Now, a DNR no longer must be signed by a healthcare professional. The one that we provide on our website is the Colorado Advanced Directive thing. Or excuse me, the Colorado DNR. And that one has to be signed by a professional, medical professional. But anymore, you can just write it out yourself and say, I do not want resuscitation, do not resuscitate me. And that will be honored by the EMTs.
Does that have to be witnessed at least by another person?
It probably would be better if it were witnessed by somebody else, but it does not have to be.
Okay, wow.
Actually, there was a case of a guy who had a DNR tattooed on his chest, and he had his signature below it tattooed on his chest.
Wow.
And that was eventually, it was decided that would be honored.
Of course, the problem is anymore that they don't take your clothes off to look at your chest.
Right.
They just start working right on your, on whatever clothes you've got on. Sometimes they'll take a coat off, but not. And another interesting little fact is that 54% of CPR attempts are made by bystanders. So they may be somebody that has been really well trained or not. Generally, a EMT type person can't get to you within the 4 to 6 minutes that are critical before brain damage starts happening. So unfortunately, if you don't have somebody that starts it right away, you're going to have brain damage.
Yeah,
because
most
oxygen is not reaching the brain.
Yeah. that's why it's important for family members and friends. The more people that learn CPR, the better off everyone is.
Right. So, because of COPD, not COPD, COVID 19, I have become more aware of what ventilators do and don't do. And there was an article published in Health Day News on April 22nd by doctors in New York City who had studied 5,700 patients who were put on ventilators in New York City. And they published it because they wanted other doctors to know, excuse me, that the outcome is not good when you put people on ventilators. They found that 88% of the people they put on ventilators died. And the reason is that when you put somebody on a ventilator, you have to know what their underlying conditions are, what kind of lung function they had before you put them on the ventilator. Because if you give too much oxygen, it destroys the lungs. If you don't give enough, then they don't get enough to function. So it's a very narrow window there that they can give the right amount of oxygen through a ventilator. And one of the things that I found really interesting was that about 50% of the people who needed a ventilator, they needed the ventilator to remain alive, but it didn't really help their condition at all. And if they were taken off of it, they went ahead and died. So one of the things these doctors said was, wait, don't put people on the ventilator immediately when they get COPD and come to the hospital. COVID, not COVD. Don't put them on the ventilator immediately. Wait and see whether they recuperate on their own, because they'll be stronger and healthier if they can. So I think one of the things that needs to be looked at more is whether or not people actually want to be put on a ventilator. And there was another little article I saw that said that prolonged mechanical ventilation or chronic critical illness is associated with hospital mortality in the range of 20 to 40%, with median hospital length of stay ranging from 14 to 60 days. Fewer than 10% of patients are discharged home, and most hospital survivors require institutionalized care. And then acute hospital readmission is common. So basically they're saying that less than 10% of people who are on ventilators get better.
Let me just make a technical comment. For some reason, we're getting some reverb from Melinda and Dave. So I am periodically muting them. I don't mean anything by that other than it seems to be the technical feedback we're getting for something we'll work out the next time we do this.
Oh.
So I don't want you feeling like you can't do it. You can raise your hand or something if you catch yourself on mute, but just noticing that feedback. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt, Lynn.
It's okay. Okay, are there any questions about CPR or ventilation?
No,
No questions.
it's very interesting though. Very, want to make sure whoever does the CPR knows what they're doing and he does it quickly if you do it.
Yes, very definitely.
Okay.
Lynn, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that comes up, so I have my my red tag on my refrigerator, but it's empty because I want them to do whatever, because I don't have any conditions, at least that I'm aware of, other than mental health issues, perhaps. But So I take it that you would put the DNAR when you're at some point in your health progression where you really wouldn't want to come back in this terrible space, that you know that you probably would have the broken ribs and the punctured lung and the no good result. When would I decide that my health condition is fragile enough that I'd rather not have some firefighter come in and just crush me and make my life worse? How do I know that?
That is one reason that we say review your advanced directives once a year.
Yeah.
Because as your situation changes and you know that you're getting more fragile, you'll want to make decisions like that you don't want to make now. Now, I'm 80 years old. I have had asthma since I was 29. I have lung function of about 55% of normal. If somebody started on me with CPR, I would have broken lungs, broken ribs and punctured lungs, more likely than not. And I don't want that kind of a life should anything happen. So I have a DNR or DNIAR, somebody who has healthy lungs, somebody who is robust in the way that they're living and everything, wouldn't want, I mean, they might want it tried. Realizing that if somebody doesn't get there within 4 minutes, there's going to be brain damage. Answer your question? Okay. All right, any other questions? Or John will go ahead and talk about completing your advanced directives.
Okay. Did you want to talk about the MOST form or?
Oh, I'm sorry, I did forget that, didn't I? Another thing that you need to know about is that there is a form called the Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment, MOST. And that is one that is requested by nursing homes when you are admitted to the nursing home or assisted living place. Realize that it is not an actual advanced directive. It does not name an agent. It does say that you would or wouldn't want CPR. It does say some other things about your care, but it's not a complete advanced directive document. And although they're trying to get more people to fill it out in Colorado, unless you're in a nursing home where you are going to go back and forth to the hospital frequently and that kind of thing, it really is not what you want. So it's a good document and it's a good process that they are doing it, because having people in nursing homes and other kinds of care centers who don't have any directives at all is not good. So they're making it part of the admittance process. But for those of us who are out walking around and doing things and not being regulated like that, it's not what the kind of document that we need.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of summarize and expand on a few things. And these are the kind of the final steps. So the first is obviously to choose an agent, fill out your paperwork, and get your documents witnessed and or notarized. Now, a witness can be anybody. There are a few people it can't be. It can't be your healthcare provider or anybody that works for them. It can't be your agent, and it can't be anybody who is listed as who would benefit from your estate, listed in your will. Anybody else it could be. They don't have to be people that know you. All the witness does is witness your signature, and the person with the signature shows them an ID card proving who they are, and they witness it. And it can be somebody you don't even know. So sometimes when we do it at libraries, we have other people who have attended our workshops witness each other's, or we grab somebody from the library to come in and witness. So that's that. The question about notarization is a little different. In Colorado, your advance directives are not required to be notarized. And
Please turn off your cell phone.
that was my phone. I just turned it off. Should have gone to a movie or something. Silence your cell phones. Anyway, with notarization,
Who's that?
well, somehow my computer is calling. We're going to ignore that. I'll figure out how not to have that happen in the future. Some states require notarization. So if you're a person who lives part of the year in one state and part of the year in another, you may want to have your documents notarized. If you're a traveler and you're traveling around and are going to be at someplace for more than a few days, you may want to take your advance directives with you, and it might be important to have them notarized. So you can make a decision as to whether to do that or not. Some people feel that if you're anticipating conflict in your family and people would be hesitant to follow what the agent says, if they're notarized, that makes them more legal. It really doesn't, but it may, when they're presenting it to the other family member who's not in agreement, it might be a little more powerful.
John, can I just add for COVID, it's hard to find notaries, or it's a little more challenging.
Right.
There are a number of video notaries. I was able to do one from a hospital just the other day, $40.
Oh.
Called the person, coordinated it. So it is still a feasible option even in COVID.
Yeah, when we had the in-person workshops, we would have what we called a signing party a few weeks after the workshop, and people would come back with their completed documents, and we would get them witnessed and notarized if they wanted. And we didn't charge for that, but most places would charge you. So completion of your records. The next step is distribution. You can give a copy of your advance directives to anybody that you want, and a copy is equally as legal as the original. So people that are important to give it to are obviously your agent, family members. Some people say, if I have somebody who's really going to disagree with me, I want to give it to them so that they get a heads up that this might be coming. Other people would say, if I have somebody that I know disagrees with me, I'm not going to give it to them. I'm not going to even let them know about it. So these are decisions that you have to make. Some people will give them to clergies, but you can give them the copy, and we recommend that you keep a list of who you've given the copies to, because you may want to change your advance directives. And it's easy to do. All you have to do is go to the person you gave them to, take the old one and destroy it, and give them a copy of the new one. But if you don't keep it, if it's been a while and you can't remember who you gave them to, if you have a list, that allows you, it's much easier to do. You keep the original with you, but don't put it in a lockbox. Don't put it in your safe deposit box. It needs to be somewhere where it's accessible, and people need to know, people around you need to know where it is. The other thing, actually the thing that I think is most important, in addition to completing your advance directives, is talking about them. Having completed them, if nobody knows anything about them or your wishes other than your agent, that's not really helpful. You need to have the conversation. And having the conversation is difficult. We realize that. Another piece in your handout is a handout called Making Your Wishes Known. And this gives you some hints as to when to have the conversation, what to talk about, conversation starters, and other things that might be very helpful to you. Another thing that I found helpful was there's an organization called the Conversation Project, theconversationproject.org. And on their website, they have documents that help people with having the conversation. The most important one, I think, is what's called the Conversation Starter Kit. You might find that helpful. And there's also one about talking to your physician. Now, your physician or your healthcare provider is somebody who should get your documents and put it in the medical records. But you also need to talk to them. And I can tell you that not all doctors are really comfortable having that conversation. It's getting better, but here's an example of a doctor that's not comfortable. What do you mean I won't need to worry about prescription refills anymore? Rather than telling him he has a serious condition and he's probably going to die. So there is now a code, an insurance code, that reimburses physicians for having these conversations with you. So once you've completed your documents, you need to make an appointment with your physician and talk to them and tell them this is why you're going to be there and that you want to talk to them. And that's what you need to do. The last thing is that on our website, we have some forms that are not advanced directives, but might be helpful to you. One's called a letter to your agent, just specifying what you're expecting your agent's duties to be. Another is a letter to your healthcare provider with the same kind of thing. And then there's some others that you can look at. So if you go on our website under forms, you can find these things and download them along with the advanced directives and these other handouts we've given you. So we pretty much come to the end. I want to leave you with one final thought, and that is that completing your advanced directives and having the conversation is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to your family. One of the greatest gifts you can give to your family. So open it up to questions at this point.
Is this part one of two?
Yes.
This is part one of two, is that correct?
No, this is the whole thing.
This is the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
We had, this was scheduled to be the in-person one, and then we had the signing party, which was the part two.
Right.
But we don't have that now that we're virtual.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
However, if you get your advanced directives all ready to go, we can somehow or other work out a way to notarize them for you if you want to.
Oh, okay.
And we do that free.
Oh, thank you. That's a very kind offer. We appreciate that.
It could meet you at a table at the library outside or something.
No, thank you for everything. It was very helpful. There's just a ton of things to think about. And
Yes.
you've given us direction, what we need to think about. And also I have a family member, both my parents have passed away, and my older sister, I have an older brother who's 10 years older than I am, who's getting close to the end of his life, but is still in fairly good health and probably hasn't taken a lot of this into consideration. So this is something I can pass along to him, this information too that he needs to know, and let him know
Yes.
how important it is. So I
That's great.
appreciate that very much.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah,
Any
it was
young- Oh, go ahead.
it was a great presentation, and I've learned so much. Thank you all.
Well,
You're welcome.
We'll be giving more of these. We're going to be doing a series at the Denver Public Library. We haven't set up dates yet. And I think, Michelle, you said that we'd probably do this twice a year at Englewood.
Yeah, at least twice a year, I would like that to happen.
Yeah.
Dave and Melinda, you could probably also go to your bank to get your paperwork notarized, the portion that needs to be notarized.
Sure.
And if you have an account with them, they usually do that for free for
Yeah.
you as well.
Right, yeah.
True.
And during
Yeah,
the
yeah.
COVID, safer at home orders, usually the way that works is you go through the drive-through, send your paperwork through the little vacuum thing, they notarize it and send it back. Some banks. So you might
Sure.
check on that as well. And I'll email you guys in a very short evaluation about the program. So if you wouldn't mind answering a few questions about how this impacts your life going forward, and if you enjoyed it or not, I sure would appreciate it. And I'm sure Tomorrow's Choice would appreciate it as well.
Okay.
Yes. And we would appreciate it if you have any suggestions as how we could make this kind of a presentation better. We would appreciate that too.
Okay, we'll do, and good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here.
Okay. Thanks for attending, and thanks you guys for being willing to throw this into a virtual world since things got wonky there.
Lynn, do you have a way for them to contact us
If they go to the website, there's a way, there's a thing that says contact us, and the email comes to me.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
So, yeah. So there's the website right there.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, just click on end, Melinda, and you guys will leave the meeting, okay?
Okay.
Go down to the corner and hit leave.
All right. Thanks again.
You bet. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you for staying with us.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to stop recording.